Okay, so the prosperity of both countries is at stake. Your language, though, has changed on President Trump since you came to office. Do you remember when you talked about him as a bully that needed to be stood up to? In February, when you were campaigning, we're going to stand up to a bully, we're not going to back down. And yet now you're much more likely to talk in more conciliatory terms. I mean, obviously one is campaigning and one is governing, but perhaps people who wanted you to do the standing up to the bully might feel that you haven't done that as much as you suggested when you were campaigning.
Well, let's be clear the actual situation. We're one of, there are two countries effectively that put retaliatory tariffs on the United States. Two countries in the world. We put them on, we kept them on up to a point where they ceased to be effective.
Mark Carney sat in his Ottawa office, signing what he called a decisive move. A new round of tariffs targeting both the United States and China. Cameras were rolling and the message was clear. Canada is drawing a line. Government officials claimed it was about protecting local industries from unfair competition. Supporters called it overdue, while critics warned it was risky. And within hours, both Washington and Beijing made their positions clear. What started as a push for economic independence quickly turned into a lesson in how fragile and interconnected Canada, as trade really is. Could the country afford to stand firm against two of the world's largest economies? Inside Ottawa, the move was sold as smart strategy, boosting local manufacturing and protecting steel and aluminum producers. Some even compared it to Trump's playbook, saying Canada could finally act without waiting for Washington. But behind the scenes, the motivation was political. Inflation was stubborn, polls were slipping, and the government needed to project strength. So Carney leaned into the optics. A public show of authority, broadcast live. For a few hours, it worked. Then the backlash hit. Washington's response was immediate. Trump administration officials brushed it off as performative politics. Within hours, U.S. trade representatives fired back with retaliatory tariffs on Canadian manufacturing, agriculture, and energy exports.
For the United States, Canada and Mexico take a lot of our business over the years, over 25, 30 years, especially during the Biden years. They took a lot of our business, and it's basically all coming back into the United States now. Well, hot as a pistol, and it's coming back in because of tariffs and the incentives.
The White House accused Mark Carney of trying to look strong instead of acting smart. Speaking at a rally in Michigan, Trump told the crowd, "Canada just taxed American goods. We'll see how that works out for them." The reaction was instant. What goes around comes around. Canadian manufacturing stocks dropped sharply. The dollar weakened. Exporters started calculating how much the U.S. counter tariffs would cost. And right on cue, China joined in, announcing a freeze on canola imports, suspending seafood contracts, and quietly delaying mineral shipments. Two superpowers, two blows in one day. And Canada felt it immediately. Business leaders were outraged. The Manufacturing Association warned of possible plant closures. Within weeks, farmers tied to export contracts began panicking about their harvests. Even unions, normally supportive of protectionist policies, slammed the rollout as chaotic and short-sighted. Media coverage quickly turned skeptical. A CBC panel asked whether Carney had walked into his own trap, while global news called it a power move that might cost more than it gains. In Parliament, opposition leaders accused the government of chasing optics instead of real solutions. The data backed them up. Inflation ticked higher. Investor confidence quietly fell. Even some liberal insiders admitted this move was more about image than policy.
Our country and felt that, given my background, I would have a chance to help change it.
Did you get elected because of President Trump, really?
I got elected, well, you'd have to ask the voters of Canada. I think...
Well, you stood because of President Trump, didn't you? You made the choice just before, you announced it just before the inauguration.
I did not stand because of President Trump, no. I stood because I believed that the person who was likely to become Prime Minister, certainly in all the polling, was not the right person for Canada, that would have been divisive government in that case and would have taken our country back as opposed to forward. It turned out to be the case that very quickly, once I was in the leadership campaign, before I became leader of the Liberal Party, and then before the general election campaign, it turned out that President Trump's actions in the trade war, as it's known, really intensified. And then I became more relevant. So certainly, yes, it helped that people made a judgment that I was.
Carney's biggest problem wasn't he just the economic fallout. It was the perception that he did it all for show. His background as a global banker has always made him appear more polished than political, a man more comfortable in boardrooms than in rallies. That signature moment, the public signing of those tariffs, soon became a symbol of something else. A leader more focused on appearing decisive than on being effective. And in Ottawa, perception is everything. By the second week, the damage was clear. Export numbers dropped sharply. Factories in Ontario and Quebec began scaling back operations. Companies like Stellantis even hinted they might shift investments to their U.S. plants, where costs were lower and markets steadier. Meanwhile, Trump's America was booming. Massive domestic subsidies and a strong dollar made U.S. manufacturing more competitive, and without the burden of tariffs. Canada's new trade barriers only made it harder to sell across the border. One economist called it a double squeeze. Fewer buyers because of American retaliation, and higher costs due to Canada's own import taxes. In short, Ottawa had managed to hurt itself twice. Even some of Carney's advisors reportedly warned against targeting both the U.S. and China at the same time. But the move had become political, and backing down would have looked weak, something Carney wasn't willing to risk. When criticism hit its peak, Carney went on national television to defend his decision.
It is not the partner that it has been before, and because its priorities have shifted. Of course, you've got specific bilateral issues with the United States, primarily over trade, and the Canadian economy has been hit hard by what President has done, particularly on steel and the auto sector and aluminium. What is your strategy for when the US, Mexico, Canada trade deal is reviewed next summer? Are you hoping the US economy by that stage is in a position where President Trump takes a different view on tariffs?
We want the best for the US economy, just as we want, slightly stronger, we want the best for the Canadian economy. But so no, our strategy is not to expect some weakness in the US economy that is going to change US negotiating position. Our strategy, part of our strategy has been to pursue the best deal for Canada. We have the best trade deal at the moment. 85% of our trade with the United States is tariff-free. We have the lowest average tariff of any country with the U.S.
Carney told Bloomberg, "Canada already has the best deal in the world. We're protecting our sovereignty." On CBC, he repeated the same message: short-term pain for long-term gain. The problem was, the pain was visible while the gain remained theoretical. Exports were falling, jobs were disappearing, and investors were moving their money south. Carney's strategy depended on faith. Faith that voters would see him as standing up for Canada. But faith in politics fades fast when people start losing work. Within weeks, the political fallout was impossible to hide. Carney's minority government began to wobble. Opposition leader Pierre Poilievre seized the moment, calling Carney the banker who broke Canada. His soundbite in Parliament: "While Mark Carney plays economist on TV, Canadian workers are paying the price," landed like a bomb. The clip went viral, racking up millions of views. Even Carney's allies admitted privately that the tariffs had created a crisis of confidence. The story was no longer just about trade. It had become a referendum on competence. Carney tried to shift the focus, talking about climate goals, innovation, and digital investment, but none of it stuck. The public mood had shifted from debate to ridicule, and in politics, that's when damage becomes permanent. He wasn't being seen as bold anymore, but as isolated. Beyond the headlines, the fallout continued to spread. The U.S. began negotiating new trade deals with Mexico and Australia, leaving Canada on the sidelines. China deepened its partnerships in South America and Africa while quietly cutting Canadian access to key markets. Even European allies, already uneasy with Ottawa's erratic trade policy, began to distance themselves. Foreign investors labeled Canada unpredictable, and industries like tech, energy, and agriculture started feeling the chill. When global confidence fades, everything slows down, and that's the part few politicians admit. A damaged reputation doesn't bounce back overnight. Carney's government eventually stopped talking about tariffs altogether, shifting focus to resilience and economic independence. But the story had already hardened into a cautionary tale, a miscalculation of epic proportions. Even supporters began to wonder if the grand signing moment, Carney smiling, pen in hand, cameras flashing, had been worth the cost. It became the image of where it all started to unravel. Canada found itself caught between two powers it couldn't afford to alienate and was too proud to appease. American firms expanded while Canadian exporters contracted. The pressure to reverse the tariffs kept rising, but doing so would mean admitting defeat. It's now a standoff between pride and practicality. The longer it drags on, the higher the costs climb. Carney still insists it was the right decision, saying history will vindicate him. But history is written by results, and right now, the results look grim. What began as a show of strength has turned into a lesson for future leaders. Never pick a fight with the two largest economies in the world. A moment crafted for television became a warning for history. Performance is not policy, and optics are not outcomes.